Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming over for this evening's event. Just a curiosity question. How many of you are here for the first time at BIC? Wow. Thank you, Dr. Bhate. You have driven another 10 people into BIC. Presumably they were living under a rock before this because we have been around for 4 years here.
Can I get any permission for that?
We shall discuss that. We shall discuss that. So I just a quick context before Sandhya introduces the topic and the author. The background of the BIC Masterclass series, we have been having this for a while now. So in the past, we have had, it actually started with Velacharu Narayan Rao. He was our first Masterclass. Then we had Adur Gopalakrishnan and Aziz Misra who spoke about films. Then we had Professor J.N. Devi who gave a series of Masterclass. So as part of this Masterclass, I reached out to a very good friend, Ramesh and Swati in the audience also know her, Sudha Gopalakrishnan. She used to head the manuscript mission and currently at the India International Center. And I said, I'm looking for people that we could call under the Masterclass series. And she told me, reach out to Dr. Saroja Bate. She's among the foremost authorities on Panini and his work. And as soon as she came in, she asked me, is this Panini? So it's like, Kempegoda's statue too. There's always this doubt whether Kempegoda looked like that. She has another image of Panini. I just said that our designer obviously picked it off Wikipedia or some other place. So if this is not Panini, our sincere apologies. But it looked nice. We just thought that he might have looked like this. So, but we look forward to having a look at your image of Panini too. So Dr. Bate, and this program was actually fixed about 7-8 months ago. And she had to cancel at the last minute for personal reasons. And then we have been toing and froing. And she actually said, I could do it any day from 8th September onwards. I immediately pounced and said, 8th September it is. And so thank you so much for being here at BIC. And we look forward to your lecture, ma'am. Over to you, Sandhya.
Okay, Ravi's done a chunk of the job of introducing why this session came about. So I would like to beg your indulgence in order to introduce today's session as well as this entire series, as well as an introduction to Dr. Bate. So this series is called the Panini Masterclass series, The Linguist, the Grammar, the Language Machine. And we're happy to bring you 3 sessions on the Sanskrit grammarian and his unique contribution to linguistics, facilitated by author and professor, Dr. Saroja Bhate. Dr. Bate was the head of the Department of Sanskrit and Prakrit Languages at Pune University from 1987 to 2001. She's been the director of about a dozen national seminars, 2 national workshops, and 2 international seminars. She received the UGC National Vedavyas Sanskrit Award for the year 2000 for excellent contribution in teaching, research, innovation, new programs, and promotion of the Sanskrit language. She's written several books, such as The Fundamentals of Anuvriti, Bhartrihari, Philosopher and Grammarian, and Law and Vedic, Grammarian and Law in Vedic and Prakrit Literature. The 3 lectures of this series will delve into different aspects of Panini. The first one today is The Linguist and His Language. It'll be an introduction to this pivotal linguist, his life, his place in the history of linguistics, and the form and content of his grammar. Tomorrow, The Perfect Grammarian, will look at the main features of Panini's Sanskrit grammar, highly acclaimed as the foremost and most perfect grammar available in the world. And we close off the series on the 10th with an ancient language machine creator, which will focus on his formal approach to language analysis, coupled with his derivational scheme and the technical devices used by him. We hope that most of you who are here today will come back tomorrow and the day after to see the series through with us. And without further, and please either switch off your mobile phones or put them on silent. And without further ado, over to Dr. Bate.
Namaskar and good evening to all of you. I am really so overwhelmed to see such a big audience with which I have never acquainted. We Sanskritists, particularly those who teach Pāṇini, they always get students not more than 5. And even among the 5 students, sometimes the first 4 they leave. And what I find in front of me is just 1 student. It is because, Pāṇini's grammar is always described as Vyaghramukhi Gauhu. always a face of a tiger. So they just look at the tiger, but they don't look behind the tiger, there is a cow. So what you're going to watch is a mixture of a tiger in the first place. But then once you enter the mouth, what you're going to enjoy is the softness, the love, and everything. Even the milk of the cow, you can say. First of all, many, many thanks to Ravi Chandraji and all his team, Saraswati and Gauriji. I gave them a lot of trouble, asking them to change my schedule and this and that and that and that, and they very patiently answered all my questions. And finally, I should say, at last I am here. And I'm very much happy to see all of you this evening. Even this evening, I had many problems reaching this place, but I'm not going to tell all these things to you. So, straight away to the topic. Yes, this is the topic. And there are several verses in praise of Pāṇini. I have selected this one. Yena dhauta girah punsam vimalai shabdavaribhihi tamascha adnyanajam bhinnam tasmai Pāṇinaye namaha. I hope most of you are acquainted with at least a bit of Sanskrit. May not be Pāṇini, but because even Sanskrits don't understand Pāṇini, I know. So it should not be really very difficult to understand. Salutations to Pāṇini, who, washed away the speech of human beings by means of pure water in the form of words, and drove away darkness of ignorance. So this is the contribution of Pāṇini according to tradition. Next. This is the picture of Pāṇini as we see on a stamp, postal stamp, which was published in memory of Pāṇini in 2004. I really wonder the earlier statue of Pāṇini exists anywhere in India. If it does, I would love to go and see it. But when I was looking for a statue in India, they said there isn't any. But to our great surprise, there were quite a few statues of Pāṇini in Pakistan, because Pāṇini lived in Pakistan. During 8th and 7th and 8th century, when the Chinese travelers visited that place, that is Yuan Sung and I Ching. These were the Chinese travelers. So they, in their reports of travels, there is a mention of having seen the statues of Pāṇini, and even they worship the statues. The people were worshipping. But now we have to be very happy, satisfied with Kempe Gowda's similarity. And this one, doesn't matter, next one. Now, during these 3 days, we will be looking into the text of Ashtadhyayi, and I want to show you only the first page of Pāṇini's grammar. It really looks like a Vyagra, because even a Sanskritist, well versed in Sanskrit, cannot make anything out of it. Ayun, rolok, eong, ayoch, etc., etc. And even the rules, mrudyura, adecha, denguna, and all that. But I just wanted to give you some idea about how it looks. So just keep it in your mind. This is how Pāṇini's grammar looks like. It is not just a digest or a textbook which teaches Sanskrit grammar. And now we go to the next slide. Let me explain to you that just in a minute. I have prepared PPTs of almost the whole lecture for today, because I wasn't sure of coming, number one. And secondly, I had some problem with my teeth. They were removed, and I wasn't sure of getting my denture before I came here. So I thought, if I am not able to speak, at least let the audience read it out. But luckily, just 2 days before I got my denture, and now I can speak to you. And I hope I can speak clearly. Do I? Yes. Thank you very much. So, you can read, and I will also read. India's intellectual tradition is enriched with several knowledge systems. Each one of these knowledge systems developed in the course of time into a full-fledged school with a rich library of scientific works. The School of Linguists is one of the leading schools with a history spanning a period more than 3 millennia. The history of language actually, or language studies, can be traced back to the oldest available literary documents, that is the Vedas. And in Vedas we have ample references to language, analysis of language, then how to make it pure and correct and all that. There is a separate sukta called Vagambruniya Sukta, which is devoted to the goddess of speech. So the Vedic seers, they looked at the speech with great awe. They thought, oh, it must be something divine. How can man speak in such a way that he can communicate with others? So it's a gift of the gods. And therefore, they simply raised speech to the status of a divine goddess, Vak. And this Vak speaks about herself in that sukta. That is Vagamruniya. And there are several small verses in Rigveda in praise of speech and how these Vedic seers, they cleaned the speech, saktumeva titauna punantaha yatra sakhaya sakhyani janate, and so on. I don't really want to explain all these things. But how speech is purified and how one should speak perfect speech in order to be able to communicate properly. So there are several verses in Rigveda itself. And therefore I say the source or the starting point of the science of grammar is already traced in the Vedic literature. Vyakarana was the earliest name we find in the Vedic literature for grammar. So Vyakarana or grammar constitutes in fact one of the 6 Vedangas. Do you have any idea about Vedanga? Vedangas are ancillary texts which are supposed to assist the interpretation of Vedic language. Therefore they are called Vedangas, Anga, parts, limbs of Veda. So Vyakarana was one of them. Right? Therefore it is called Vedanga, and therefore it is given a sacred place in the repertoire of Vedic literature. They actually arose out of the need to preserve and protect the Vedic language. So in the course of time, however, the scope of linguistic activity did not remain confined to the Vedic language, and gradually it was extended to spoken language. So earlier it was just Vedic language which they put to analysis and all that. But then once they got this tool of analyzing language, then they started using that tool for analyzing the spoken language. You know, Sanskrit also was a spoken language at that time. There is always a controversy about whether there ever was Sanskrit a spoken language. And they say that no, it was just the language of rituals, it was the language of mantras, and just meant for recitation. But no, Pāṇini's grammar itself is a great proof for Sanskrit being a spoken language at some point of time. It did not remain confined to the Vedic language, and gradually it was extended to spoken language. However, just stray references to several ancient grammarians and their specific opinions are scattered over Sanskrit literature. We don't have any concrete grammatical text of ancient times. We have only stray references. But even then, they speak of a flourishing grammatical tradition continuing for many centuries towards the end of the Vedic literature. Because there were several grammatical traditions, and we find names of several grammarians and their views also recorded in later Sanskrit literature. A complete grammatical text of none of these grammarians is available. The first full-fledged grammatical composition available in the later tradition is Pāṇini's grammar called Ashtadhyayi, and that is why we call it the oldest, the foremost, but surprisingly the most complete grammar available so far, not only in India but all over the world. That is the greatness of this grammarian. Pāṇini's grammar is till today, it is regarded as a model grammar of a language that can ever be composed. Herein lies the greatness of this grammarian, and that is why all students of linguistics, not only of Sanskrit, and even scientists, students of even different disciplines, because Pāṇini actually gave the foundation of scientific thinking. Again, he was foremost in he was first and foremost in many other respects also. We are going to see that later on. Pāṇini is thus the oldest grammarian of Sanskrit with a complete grammar. Though Pāṇini was preceded by at least 10 grammarians, because he does mention the name of 10 grammarians. You know, Pāṇini was not actually the first to compose the grammar of Sanskrit. He was preceded by many grammarians. 10 he mentions, but in tradition, if we go deeper, we find the names of at least 85 grammarians. Just stray references and names, but you don't get anything beyond that. But Pāṇini actually mentions 10 grammarians. So he must have drawn upon the grammars of these grammarians. But probably with the arrival of his grammar, the earlier grammars were discontinued from the study, and that may be the reason why they are lost to us and they disappeared. Pāṇini's grammar laid down a solid foundation for a subsequent linguistic tradition. It must be noted that though several grammatical schools arose even after Pāṇini, and they are still there with full library, so many books also are there, and so many post-Pāṇinian grammatical tradition exist even today in literature, of course. And they are being studied in different countries outside India. None of them rose to eminence which Pāṇini's grammar achieved. Thus, not only did Pāṇini's grammar surmount earlier grammatical compositions, but also it outshined later grammatical schools. This is how you know another greatness of Pāṇini. He always reigns supreme in the whole domain of grammar. Pāṇini thus reigns supreme in the world of Indian linguistics. Even today, in all schools and institutes where Sanskrit is taught, the study begins with learning Pāṇini's grammar. There are a few places in India where other systems are being taught, but they are very far and few between, and you know, even they teach it, finally they have to shift to Pāṇini. And they have to study Pāṇini, because Pāṇini's grammar is being taught everywhere in the world, wherever Sanskrit is being taught. It is the first thing to be studied by the students who want to study Sanskrit. Pāṇini's greatness as a grammarian is, however, not confined to the world of Indian linguistics. He is highly acclaimed as the world's oldest and at the same time greatest grammarian. Here are a few quotes regarding the praise showered upon him by international linguists. So, in praise of Pāṇini, George Cardona, these are the linguists from different places in the world. He's an American. Pāṇini's grammar is the pinnacle of achievements in the field of Sanskrit grammar. Then Bloomfield, who wrote a very famous book called Language, again from US, the descriptive grammar of Sanskrit which Pāṇini brought to its highest perfection is one of the greatest monuments of human intelligence. Paul Kiparsky is a linguist who was teaching in Texas in US. Modern linguistics acknowledge it, that is Pāṇini's grammar, as the most complete generative grammar of any language yet written and continues to adapt, that is more important, technical ideas from it. Then Pierre Filiosa is a French linguist. Pāṇini's grammar is the first and the foremost example of formalization of a technical exposition in the universal history of science. Scharfe is another American linguist. Ashtadhyayi was not a device to create Sanskrit sentences, but was an iconic representation of the sacred language. It was not just meant for teaching. Iconic representation of the sacred language. And what does this icon consist of? A computational structure. That is precisely why computer experts are keen to computerize it. About lifetime and education of this great intellectual, very little is recorded in the tradition. This is the case with even other scholars in ancient India, even with Kalidasa, as all of you know. The date of Kalidasa is not certain. And all the great poets, even Mahabharata and Ramayana, is the same story. He belonged to a period, probably of course, between 6th and 5th century. His mother's name was Dakshi because at one place there is a reference to Pāṇini as Dakshi Putra, son of Dakshi. So his mother's name must have been Dakshi. And father's name was perhaps Panin or Pāṇina because he was called Pāṇini. Pāṇini is a patronymic, and therefore we can imagine that his father must have been someone called either Panin or Pāṇino. Among his other names are mentioned Shalanki, Shalaturiya and Dakshiputra. These names appear in different lexicons, Sanskrit lexicon. He was born in a town called Shalatura. He is called Shalaturiya. And it is very interesting to note that Shalatura is present-day Lahore and not Lahore. Lahore is a small town in Pakistan. Incidentally, I wrote a small book on Pāṇini, which is published by Sahitya Akademi. And while I was writing, I thought, why don't I find out the place, the real place of Pāṇini? And then I wrote a letter of request to the Director General of Archaeology of Pakistan. I really didn't have any hopes that he would reply to a question of an ordinary scholar working in the University of Pune. But to my great surprise, his reply came. And he told me, yes, Pāṇini belongs to Pakistan. And he was very proud to say that. And then he told me further that, yes, he belonged to Lahore. And there was a small mount which was regarded as the birthplace of Pāṇini. But unfortunately, the villagers leveled it. And therefore, the place is now, it has disappeared. But we are going to start an institute in the name of Pāṇini. Pāṇini Institute of Linguistics. I really don't know whether the institute has come up. But as I told you, Yuan Sung and I Ching, they saw the statues of Pāṇini in Pakistan. I mean, in today's Pakistan, I should say. And therefore, students and scholars and linguists of Pakistan, they always claim Pāṇini. They say that Pāṇini belongs to us. Many anecdotes are found in Sanskrit narrative works such as Katha Sarit Sagara. A brief account of his grammar appears also in the reports and biographies of these two Chinese travelers whom I mentioned, Yuan Sung and I Ching. It is clear from these accounts that Pāṇini's grammar was very popular in India during 6th and 7th centuries, and that he was known as Rishi, sage. And there goes a story that Pāṇini was born completely dull. This is a story, this is an anecdote which is told in Katha Sarit Sagara, that he was quite dull, ignorant in the beginning, and almost driven out of the house, but then he practiced very austere penance. And he worshipped Lord Shiva, and Shiva was pleased with him. And then he gave him a boon in the form of the 14 sutras, which we saw in that slide earlier. And then he taught him Vyakarana. So whatever Vyakarana Pāṇini taught, came from Shiva. So he was not at all intelligent, it was a divine gift to him. Exactly contrary to that, we get lot of information in Chinese reports. And very recently I got some information, authentic information I should say, from the translation of the reports of the Chinese travelers. Should I read it out? It's not there. I very recently, just last week, I got it from a student who is doing his postdoc in Oxford. So he found it for me. And now, this is the translation, only a small piece. Men's lives were reduced to the length of 100 years when Rishi Pāṇini was born. Earlier the men used to live for 1,000 years. So this is again history mixed with mythology. So Rishi Pāṇini was born, and he was from his birth extensively informed about things. So he was very intelligent. The times being dull and careless, there was no interest in learning language and grammar. They were dull. He wished to reform the vague and false rules. The grammar which was being taught during those days was not really good, in a good condition. So he wanted to introduce some reforms in that, to fix the rules and correct the improprieties. As he wandered about asking for right ways, he encountered Ishvara Deva. So Ishvara Deva may not be Lord Shiva, but maybe some person, human being, and recounted him the plan of his undertaking. He told him that I want to write a correct and simple grammar of Sanskrit. So Ishvara Deva said, wonderful, I will assist you in this. The Rishi then labored incessantly. So here is a reference to Pāṇini having labored very hard and put forth all his power of mind. This is a Chinese translation, a translation from Chinese. He collected a multitude of words and made a book of letters which contained 1,000 shlokas. Each shloka was of 32 syllables. It contained everything known from the time till then. So he collected vast data from Sanskrit language going back to Vedas till his times. It contained everything known from the first till then without exception, respecting letters and words. So he was very exhaustive in his collection of data, basic data, raw material. He then closed it and he wrote a book, and he closed it and sent it to the king of that time. And there is another account which tells us that he was in Pataliputra at that time. So he went to the king, who exceedingly prized it. So the king was very happy to see the grammar and issued an edict, and edict that throughout the kingdom it should be used and taught to others. And he added that whoever should learn Pāṇini's grammar from the beginning to end should receive as his reward 1,000 pieces of gold. So this came from the king at that time. And thus, of course, Pāṇini's grammar was made very popular. And this English translation is from CUK, which means Buddhist Records of the Western World by Yuan Sang. Okay, the next. Now we will just have a short look at the some unique features of Pāṇini's grammar, about which we may get introduced in the next 2 sessions, or next 3 I should say. So the oldest and the most perfect grammar in the world, the first secular scientific composition. Till Pāṇini wrote his grammar, all literature that was composed in India just revolved around the Vedas. So it was all religious literature, it was liturgical literature, it was ritual literature. Everything was devoted to the study of the Vedic language. But with Pāṇini, actually, the language was brought from the heaven to the earth. So this is the first secular and at the same time scientific work. That is again his greatness. It is the most ancient grammar of spoken language. That is, again I say, secular. It is descriptive or not prescriptive. Generally, when we study grammar, what we find is that they always say, you should do this, you must do this. But Pāṇini never asks his students to do something. He says, he always very politely says, this is what is found in the speech. It's purely descriptive. He describes the language, but he doesn't prescribe anything. A very, very humble personality that Pāṇini was. Then formal approach is, actually it is one of his greatest contributions, formalism. We are going to talk about it. The most distinct contribution of Pāṇini to the development of Indian knowledge systems. The foremost document of a fully developed meta-language. What is meta-language we are going to see in the next, meta-language actually is a scientific language, and Pāṇini gave to the world the very first scientific language for composing a scientific treatise. It is composed in a perfectly abstracted code language. This should be clear to you when you look into Pāṇini's grammar. Will you please show that page of, the first page of Pāṇini's grammar again, go back to that slide. Yeah, this one. So I would like to speak something more about it. You may not find it in the slides. So here what we find in the beginning are the 14 Pratyahara Sutras. They are called Pratyahara Sutras. So it is nothing but the chart of the basic Sanskrit alphabet. It's a catalogue of Sanskrit alphabet. It is arranged in a slightly different order. When we study any language in the school, we really study in a similar way. We study the vowels first, a, e, o, a, I, and so on, and then all the consonants again, order according to their classes, k, kh, g, g, ng, ch, ch, j, j, y, etc. This order already existed before Pāṇini. They called it Matruka Patha, because there were several phonetic texts which arose for the study of Vedic language even before Pāṇini. And therefore, kakau, gagaung, etc., such classification already existed before Pāṇini. So Pāṇini had that chart before his eyes, but he made some changes because he wanted to suit this order to his grammar. Out of this, he prepared short forms, abbreviations, that we are going to see later. But I, un, ruluk, eong, I, ouch, these final consonants, they disappear. So what he says is a, I, u, rulu, e, o, I, o, and so on. They are called Pratyahara Sutras or Shiva Sutras or Maheshwara Sutras, because the tradition goes that these sutras, they arose out of the beating of the drum by Lord Shiva in front of Pāṇini. He danced. He was so pleased with Pāṇini's penance that he appeared before him. He danced with his drum. And out of the beating of the drum arose those 14 sutras. And therefore they are known as Maheshwara Sutras. And they say that there is a place in south, in Kerala, perhaps Tiruvayur or some such place, where there is a place called Pāṇini Mandapa. And they said that it is here that Pāṇini got those 14 sutras from Lord Shiva. So Maheshwara Sutras, then they are also called Varna Sutras, and also Akshara Samamnaya is yet another name which we find in later Panini works, in commentaries. Akshara Samamnaya is a Vedic word actually. For any kind of a Vedic collection, they use the word Samamnaya. So this is a cluster of 14 small aphorisms. So this is actually an appropriate beginning of a grammar. Always a grammar has to begin with the chart of the alphabet. And then what we have they are called sutras. Vriddhi Radhaich, Aden Gunaha, Iko Guna Vriddhi, and so on and so forth. They are all known as sutras, and such individual sutras, they are 3,994 altogether. But if we try to recite the whole of the Ashtadhyayi in one sitting, it doesn't take more than 3 hours, less than 3 hours actually. Such a short text, very small, concise, pithy, in the form of sutras like this. So what is a sutra? You should have an idea from this. And you, Sanskritists, when they try to decipher the meaning, they really don't find anything. Traditionally, the Vedic Pandits, they recite Ashtadhyayi as a part of their Vedic recitation, even in Maharashtra. I don't know what happens in Karnataka, but they continue to do that. Therefore, Pāṇini's Ashtadhyayi continues through oral tradition as well as manuscript tradition. There are again more than 500 manuscripts or even more. If my student is there who is working on Ashtadhyayi, he can tell you the exact number. He told me he would be coming. I don't. Manish is there. Manish, how many manuscripts are?
So far we have found 370, but as per our it is more than 700.
More than?
700.
700. So this sutra is a genre particular to Sanskrit literature. It arose actually out of the need to capitulate basic knowledge in all disciplines. We don't have sutras only in Pāṇini's grammar. We have Shrauta Sutras, we have Dharma Sutras, we have Brahma Sutra, a very well-known text in Vedanta. So since education was imparted through oral transmission from generation to generation, there were no books, there was no written tradition, and therefore everything was supposed to be memorized. So in order to facilitate memory, they composed their basic scientific works in a sutra style, and this is how sutra style developed in India. And this is always unintelligible even to Sanskritists who are not trained, of course, in the method of decoding this language. It's a code language, and unless we know the decoding mechanism, we really don't understand anything. But for our great happiness, Pāṇini himself gives the decoding mechanism which is inbuilt there. But again, for our great misfortune, we really don't understand even the decoding mechanism unless there is a guru to decode it for us. So decode the decoding mechanism through the teacher, and then you further decode Pāṇini's code language. This is the procedure. Now we come to the This is, you can say, the form and content of the Ashtadhyayi. I am sure you cannot make out much out of it, but I just tried to give you in brief what Ashtadhyayi contains and how we can formulate it. So it is Ashtadhyayi means 8 chapters. Ashta Adhyaya. So Western scholars, particularly there is a scholar called Fadagon, they studied the Ashtadhyayi and tried to develop some form for Ashtadhyayi, and they divided the text of the whole Ashtadhyayi in 2 parts, analysis and synthesis. So the first part, from 1st to 5th chapter, is devoted to analysis of Sanskrit language. So we talked about Pāṇini's collection of raw material from the Vedic period to his present. And then what he did was he analyzed all those speech units or all those sentences which he collected. And he went on analyzing it. What he found was, let us first of all concentrate on analysis, and then I come to the synthesis. What he found was that the sentence was the largest meaningful unit in a speech. So he started with Vakya, the sentence. Then he found further, which is known to all of us, that a sentence is composed of padas, that is words. So words meaningfully connected with each other, not just placed near each other, but they are meaningfully connected with each other, they form a sentence. Then further, a pada or a word is constituted of two elements, that is prakriti and pratyaya. A prakriti is a root and a pratyaya is a suffix added to that root. The root is further divided into verbal root and a nominal root. And therefore a verbal root is called dhatu. Some of these terms I think you are already acquainted with. Dhatu, root, just a verbal root. And pratipadika is noun. Dhatu is again further classified into two groups. There is a dhatu patha, a list of roots, which is there as an appendix to Pāṇini's grammar, dhatu patha. There is a list of roots, about 2000 roots put together. And further, we have sadhita dhatus. Sadhita means Pāṇini's grammar provides a mechanism through which we can derive roots either from nouns or from verbal roots themselves. And just to give you one example, perhaps you know the root kru, to do, kru, karoti. And there are several derivative roots from kru. One of them is chikirsha. So chikirsha is another root. Chikirsha means to desire to do something. So another root from a root which is already listed in the dhatu patha. So this is root from a root, and there are also roots derived from nouns. So to give you an example, putra, you know, putra means son. From the word putra, we can derive a root, putriya, means to desire for a son. Dasharatha putriyati. Dasharatha wanted a son. So putriyati. So, and then it is conjugated as a verb. And you know the number is infinite in that case. All nouns, all roots, they can derive different kind of derivative roots. I gave you just one example of to desire, but there are many other meanings also in which a root or a noun can derive a further root. So this is about dhatu. And pratipadika or noun is further classified into several categories, basically two, kevala and sadhita. Kevala is just any word like Rama, Krishna, etc. Even Rama and Krishna are now, they are also put to derivation. Ramante yoginaha iti Ramaha. And Krishna is from Krusha because his color was black. And Krusha is a color which is not liked by all. According to Yaska, Yaska is an etymologist of ancient India, even before Pāṇini. So these names, actually the names which cannot be derived, they are kevala pratipadikas. And the names which are derived with the help of Pāṇini's grammar, they are in another category, that is sadhita. So samasa is a derived name. Samasa again is a pratipadika. Ramakrishna, as you know, is a very well-known samasa. And you might be knowing many other. Rajapurusha is yet another samasa. Rajapurusha, servant of a king. And you might be knowing many more. So all these samasas are derived noun, derived pratipadikas. They are secondary, they are not original pratipadikas. Similarly, we have krudantas. Let us go back to the same root kru. From root kru, we have a noun which is derived, and that noun is kruta, that is done. What is done is kruta. So it is a derivative. It is derived from root kru, but it is a noun. It is a pratipadika. So we call it sadhita or derivative. Then taddhitanta. Taddhita is yet another category, secondary derivatives. There are several hundred meanings that taddhita suffix can denote. Just again to give you one example, I'm sure you all have perhaps, not sure, recited Rama Raksha. At least during this period, it carries a lot of meaning. Huh? You should recite Rama Raksha. So, who was the father of Rama? Dasharatha. So Rama is called Dasharathi. Dasharathi is a Taddhita derivative. It's a patronymic. Dasharathasya apatyam, son of Dasharatha is Dasharathi. So it is another category of derivative pratipadika, Taddhita. So Krut Taddhita and Stri Pratyanta. All nouns of women, unfortunately women, not a good news for you. For me, I also. And that is in Pāṇini's grammar, all feminine names are derived from the names of the men. We should actually protest against Pāṇini, I always say. It is not other way around, but it has to be. But they derive Nadi from Nado, which is again an hypothetical male noun. Nada, yes, of course, it does appear somewhere. But all Stri Pratyantas are again feminine nouns, they are derivatives. Then samasa, so many categories you are already acquainted with. Avyayi bhava, tatpurusha. They are in our local language. Even in Kannada also you might be having it, the same, isn't it? Because in Marathi we have it. Bahuvrihi, dvandva, and there is a separate category also, kevala, samasa. And then within tatpurusha there are three karmadhara, dvigu, vibhakti, tatpurusha, etc. And here again, in the kevala category of pratipadika, you will find two classes, anavyaya and avyaya. And you will be surprised to know that avyaya is a noun in Pāṇini's grammar. Avyaya means an indeclinable. Avyaya doesn't decline. Like we have Ramaha, Ramau, Ramaha, etc. We don't have an avyaya which is declined for all the cases. But yet, it is a noun in Pāṇini's grammar for some technical reasons. Pāṇini declines each and every noun and then prescribes deletion of that case ending. And then it becomes avyaya. So avyaya is a noun. Anavyaya categories are two, nama and sarvanama. Known to everybody, I am sure, nouns and pronouns. They are simple categories of pratipadikas. And avyaya is further classified into several. Swaradi is a separate class of avyayas. Then we have nipata, upasarga, gati and karma pravachaniya. Upasarga is again known to you. Gati, karma pravachaniya, they are typical technical categories which are again devised by Pāṇini. So this is about prakruti. We talked about only roots. And now suffix, that is pratyaya. They are again of two kinds. Pratyayas are two kinds. Pada nishpadaka, that is pratyayas which when attached either to a verbal root or to a noun generate words to be used in a sentence. They create pada. Pada is a finished word which is worthy to be used in a sentence. So Rama is a pratipadika and we derive the pada Ramaha. We derive the pada Ramena. When I was in Bangalore, I was just wondering, what is this O, Bangalore? Is it a prathama ekvachan pratyay? Is it a nominative singular, Bangalore, or it is a pratipadika? Is it a pure noun or it is a pratipadika? So all ukarantas are pratipadikas?
No, this particular.
Okay. So whenever I heard ukaranta, it should be taken as a pratipadika.
Actually, yes, ma'am. In Kannada, most of the nouns end with a u, right? So you will say basu, karu,
Yeah.
like that. Some of them, not all of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Typically, they attach themselves to nouns.
Yeah. But even in the nominative singular, it is the same.
What do you mean?
Prathama ekvachan pada is the same. No, in old Marathi, we have say a word like Surya, and in the Marathi which we find in Jnaneshwara's Dhaneshwari, the oldest Marathi book. He would say Suryu. Then there is a word Tama, which is darkness. He would say Tamu. So that is a nominative singular. So I was actually wondering whether Bangalore also has or Kannada has the same practice. Anyway.
Most of the foreign words, actually. Bangalore is more like an English version of Bengaluru. In Kannada, it is Bengaluru.
Oh, yeah.
It will be Mysuru.
Yeah, I know. So you finally made it to Bangalore. Earlier it was Bangalore, isn't it? Or Bangalore.
No, it comes from called Uru. Uru means place. So Bengaluru.
I see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she told me. Yes.
When Uru, it's a Bengaluru.
Mm-hmm. So, sup and ting are the two categories of pada nishpadaka pratyas. That means derivative suffixes. So, Ramaha is one example. Rama is a pratipadika and Ramaha is a pada. So, how do we arrive at Ramaha? We add the suffix sa to Rama and then it further develops into ha, that is visarga in Pāṇini's grammar. So, Ramaha is a pada which is derived from Rama with the help of the suffix su. And ting are the verbal endings. So we have a root like bhu and we get the form bhavati from root bhu. So bhavati is a pada because it is used in a sentence. It becomes a meaningful word. Bhu is not actually a meaningful word which cannot be used in the sentence. But bhavati can be. So with the help of pada nishpadaka pratyaya, you derive what is called padas. And then these padas are worthy of being used in a sentence. And then there is another set of pratyas which are called prakruti nishpadakas. Now you will be surprised to know that the whole grammar works like a cycle. There are some suffixes which derive the prakruti. And then this prakruti further is declined and it goes into pada level. Then pada can further be, it can be put back into a machine. So this is how Pāṇini's machine works. So we have prakruti nishpadaka pratyas which are again krut and taddita pratyas. So krut pratyas is like ta which is added to the root kru and we get the pratipadika kruto. So it is a suffix ta which when added to a root derives the pratipadika. And taddita derivatives are derived from pratipadikas. Again, back to the same example, the Dasharatha is a pratipadika. We add the suffix e and we get the pratipadika Dasharathi. So this is pratipadika nishpadaka. From one pratipadika to another, from one root to a pratipadika. And then there are dhatu nishpadaka pratyas. They are san, kyach, kamyach, kyang, kyash, etc., etc. So many pratyas. One of them is san, that is, I gave you the example, chikirsha. Chikirsha means to desire to do something. Jigamisha means to desire to go. From the root gama. Gama means to go. From the root gama, we derive another root, jigamisha. Jigamisha vartate. So I have a desire to go somewhere. So this is again the root deriving another root. And all such roots are known as sanadi. So there are about 10 pratyas which are known as derivative pratyas which derive roots from roots. So this is about analysis. So Pāṇini went down, analyzing the language, and finally he arrived at two building blocks, I should say. Basic building blocks, Prakriti and Pratyaya. So with this, his analysis is complete. But no, not really. With this, his function of word building is complete. But then he further broke down Prakriti and Pratyaya into phonemes, which we find in that chart Ayun, Ruluk, etc. He arrived at the basic phonemes, which are again the basic building blocks of the language. But there are two different levels. One level is semantic and the other one is phonetic. On the level of phonemes, he broke down all the phonemes into those 9 swaras and some 25 consonants, in all 33. And he broke down all the meaningful speech units into Prakriti and Pratyaya. So this actually can be compared to the task of an engineer or an architect who is asked to construct a heritage building, you can say, new heritage building from the same building which exists. So what he does is analysis. He dismantles the building. So his first endeavor is to dismantle the building. So take away the windows, the doors, and all the meaningful parts of that building, the columns, even the parts of the roof, etc. And also come down to the bricks, basic bricks. So the work of analysis is complete. That is the work of dismantling the great mansion. And then he comes to the other side, that is synthesis. And synthesis is reassembling. So from the same block of bricks and windows and doors and columns, he rebuilds the whole thing. That is, you may call it synthesis in the subject of language. So this is exactly what Pāṇini does. So Pāṇini's whole endeavor can be compared to that of an architect who first dismantles a huge mansion and then reassembles it. Pāṇini did the same thing with the mansion of the language, you can say. And on the side of synthesis, we have several kind of concepts like Adesha, Agama, Sandhi, Swara, and Kala. So what Pāṇini does is he puts these two bricks together, Prakriti and Pratyaya, and then he works upon them. Sometimes he makes some change in the Prakriti, he makes some change in the Pratyaya. And then he goes on building and rebuilding and finally arrives at the word like, Bhavati from Bhu. So Bhu becomes Bhava. And even before Bhavati, there is another suffix, Lat. I really don't want to scare you in my very first lecture because I want the same audience for tomorrow. Actually, I did some sort of a marketing by giving you the quotes of great international scholars. I thought you might be tempted to know more about Pāṇini. But these terms, they are rather scaring. Anyway. So Adesha is a substitution. Bhu is substituted by Bhava, you can say. So this is another kind of a process. Agama is something put in between or put before or put at the end. So Agama is an addition. Adesha is a substitution. Sandhi is just joining together. Swara is accent. In Sanskrit language, accent and tone, they are very important. We have lost all importance of accent and tone in modern Sanskrit, in classical Sanskrit, but it was written in Pāṇini's grammar. And Pāṇini made a lot of use, and he made a very close observation of how accent is being employed in the language, in the speech, and how it is meaningful. Pāṇini actually attached a lot of meaning to accent and even to tone. We will come to that a little later, but if I forget, I may request you to remind me of that, because that is yet another very great part of Pāṇini's grammar. So, with Pāṇini or even before Pāṇini, this procedure of analysis started. They say that earlier speech was just indivisible. With grammarians came the division. So earlier people, Vedic people, they did not know what is Vakya and what is Pada, because it was a continuum. The whole Vedas, they are recited as a continuum, you know that. This is known as Samhita Patha. Agni Mile Purohitam Yajnasya Devam Mritujam. It's complete sentence. Nobody knows what are the words there. Only the Pandits, the Rishis. Then came the grammarians, and then they started separating them, attaching separate meanings. So Agnim, Ile, Puraha, Hitam, and so on and so forth. And therefore, there goes a story in Taittiriya Brahman, Taittiriya Samhita, which says, first let me recite the Sanskrit sentence and then I will explain it to you in English. Vagvai parachi avyakruta avadat. Speech in ancient times, parachi. It was being spoken avyakruta, indistinct. Nobody knew actually where to split the sentence. Avyakruta avadat. And then all the gods, they came to Indra and they say, oh Lord, please separate it for us. Please divide it for us. Te deva indram abruvan imam no vacham vyakuru iti. So this is how vyakuru, vyakarana came into existence. So please separate the speech for us. And then tam indraha madhyataha avakramya vyakarot. So then Indra, at the request of the devas, he stepped down the speech. He stepped down the speech. Madhyataha avakramya. He went down and down and down. As Pāṇini went down from the sentence to the pratyaya and prakriti. So same way, Indra also did it. So Indra was the first Vyakarana, they say. Even before Shiva, they say. So there are actually two traditions of Sanskrit Vyakarana, Indra tradition and Shaiva tradition. Pāṇini belongs to Shaiva. This is all mythological. Nobody knows whether really God Indra composed any Vyakarana. But our tradition always gives credit to all deities in order to make it a sacred thing. It's all human endeavor. There are no divine interventions actually. But unless we say that it is a God's gift, people really did, at least during that period, they did not really entertain it. If it comes from God, then okay, yes, we accept it. This is the mentality. Okay, I did not give any slides any further now. All right. So here, I think I have talked to you about phonemic analysis also. I don't need to say. So I think here I can stop, and maybe if we have any specific question, I will take it up. Yes, immediately. Thank you. I'm so glad for your very patient listening.
So I just wanted to ask, how would people understand each other if there was no separation in the language? How would people understand each other if there was no separation in the language? You said like before the origin of Vyakaran, everything was just one, right? So how did people understand anything? That's
This is the question?
Yeah.
I don't say this. I did not say that people did not understand. It is a myth. It's a mythological account.
Okay.
So, just they wanted to. Oh, sorry. But I think Okay. Is it? Okay. Just in order to explain the origin of Sanskrit grammar, Vyakarana, they have developed this myth. Beyond that, we should not try to make any meaning out of it. This is what I feel. But even then, we can find out that even today, in Pathashalas, wherever Sanskrit, particularly Vedas are being taught, they are being taught to the small students without explaining them the meaning. I visited many Pathashalas and asked their gurus, why don't you explain the meanings to them? And they said, if we do that, the grip of memorization is loosened. It becomes loose. So let them first recite the whole thing without understanding the meaning. And then a time will come, say, after 12 years. And then they will understand the meaning. So maybe sometime in the history, it was like this. I remember one verse from the Nirukta of Yaska, which says, Sthanurayam bharaharaha kilabhut. You can sit down. Aditya vedam na vijanati ortham. So he says, Yaska says that if a person recites Veda without understanding the meaning, what is he? He is like a lamp. He is like a lamp post. He is like a column. Sthanu. Sthanu ayam bharahara. He is like a trunk of a tree. So Yaska already was aware of this kind of thing going on in the society, that people were just reciting Veda without understanding the meaning. And maybe later on, when they saw all such happenings, they must have developed this story. That's the only explanation.
Thank you. I had another question. It's a little on the basic side, but I want
Speak into the mic.
Sorry, yeah. So I wanted to understand, so did Panini develop a new grammar? Like, did it transform the language, or is it explaining what the language was before it?
Number one, Pāṇini did not develop a new grammar at all. Pāṇini was standing on the shoulders of his predecessors. Even before him, as I told you, there was a long tradition of Sanskrit grammar, and many concepts Pāṇini really borrowed from his predecessors. What was your next, another question?
No, I was just asking, for example, did the previous literature still follow the Panini grammar? Does that just detail the existing language, or are there any new rules introduced which change how language works?
By previous mean pre-Paninian?
Yes.
This question is similar to the question, egg or hen? Isn't it? Whether language came first or grammar came first. So do you want to say that those who spoke language before Pāṇini, they followed the rules of grammar? No. It is grammar which has to follow the language. Grammar arose out of the need to preserve the language, to analyze the language. And they always say, in Sanskrit there is a saying, Sthitasya gatihi chintaniya. Whatever is given to us needs to be explained. And there goes a very beautiful story in Patanjali's Mahabhashya. Patanjali is a commentator of Pāṇini. And he, in very clear terms, he says, in a very funny manner, he says, should I say in Sanskrit first? Yatha kaschit kumbhakara kulam gatva aha kuru kumbham prayunshmahi na tatha kaschit vayyakarana kulam gatva aha kuru shabdan prayunshmahi. Just as someone goes to a pot maker, kumbhakara, you know pot maker? Or in ancient days there used to be. You know that wheel of the kumbhakara, and they used to make pots for drinking water, etc. So people go to him and they say, oh, I want this size of a pot, make it for me. So do you think that it is a job of a grammarian? Patanjali asks, do you think that the job of a grammarian is similar to that of a kumbhakara? I should go to the grammarian. Yesterday I had to go to the grammarian and ask him, oh, tomorrow I have to give a lecture in Bangalore, so please give me 2 kilos of words. This is what Patanjali says. So you cannot expect a grammarian to create words for you. Grammarian always draws upon the existing usage. It is the usage which is the raw material. Even grammarians have acknowledged it. So whatever exists in the language is further analyzed by grammarians. It is not other way around. Grammarians are not allowed to create language, at least in tradition. And they were not supposed to do that. Well, they can hand over to you a language generating machine, which Panini did. And that's why it's working even today. Pāṇini has provided infinite vocabulary to the world of Sanskritis, but not with this thought that I will generate Sanskrit language. No, it is his computing machine which automatically does it. So it's never ever the job of a grammarian to create a language. So those who existed before Pāṇini, they were just speaking the language. The way, how was language created? Nobody knows. There were two people talking to each other and they found that there is something common between you and me. You say Ramaha, I say Rama, and you understand the meaning. So okay, Rama is established. So this is how the language came into existence. So first language and then its analysis. Could I make my point clear?
Yes, ma'am, I understand.
Good evening, and thank you for laying out the landscape so beautifully. My question is about the word sounds, the phonemes. So I'm wondering whether I should ask my question tomorrow. But I've also learned that each sound has a particular meaning and a resonance based on what that sound means and the way our mouth moves when we say it. So, for example, kha, because you open the mouth, is about expansiveness, therefore kagha, the bird. And when you learn it like that, it sounds so counterintuitive that the sound and the meaning should be so closely intertwined that how come other languages around the world were not based on that? Why is it only in Sanskrit that the sound and the meaning are so beautifully aligned?
Pāṇini's approach is purely formal. He doesn't talk about the meaning of phonemes, first of all. And you can never say that each and every sound in Sanskrit is connected with a particular meaning. It's not like that. Nowadays, Pāṇini is being studied by neurologists. You might have seen it on the internet. And I was so happy to see that Pāṇini's area is being extended further to neurologists. And they are trying to find out whether the phonemes as they are analyzed by Pāṇini can be connected with certain meanings. No, not really that. But yes, Pāṇini does find some distinction on the basis of sound difference. But that happens in only some places. Even in case of accent and also in case of some sounds. Just to give you one example, there is a word, susikta. Susikta means very well sprinkled. So somebody is sprinkling water on the ground and there is somebody who wants to appreciate that. And he says susikta. There is another word, sushikta. So sa becomes sho. Dantya becomes retroflex. This difference does exist in Pāṇini's, even before Pāṇini, I should say. And then the meaning changes. In one case, there is an appreciation. In the other case, there is a contempt. So when I teach my students, and my student is sitting there, he might remember, I tell my students, when the mother-in-law is talking to her daughter-in-law, she says, sushiktam tvaya. Oh, how beautifully you are sprinkled. And there is a tone of contempt. But when the mother says it to daughter, she says, sushiktam tvaya. So there is an appreciation and there is a contempt. So, to diametrically different meanings are being conveyed by these two different sounds. One is dantya and the other one is. But this happens rarely. Pāṇini should be credited with picking all such nuances and handing them over to us. And credit goes not to Pāṇini, but to the previous tradition of phoneticians who composed works like Shiksha and Pratishakya, where we find all these ka, kha, ga, gha, ma, their place of articulation, their point of articulation, the whole process right from the navel, how the wind comes through the wind pipe, how it is being obstructed in the mouth, and when it is being released, how it produces different sounds. So the whole process of articulation is very beautifully described in the works of phonetics. Atma, Buddhya, Atma and Buddhi. First they join together and first of all they decide what sound is to be produced. All this process happens behind the curtain, actually. Nobody knows. We speak so quickly, so fast, but we don't know all these processes happening within our body. Atma, Buddhya, Sametyarthan, Mano Yungte Vivaksha. Atma, Buddhi, Mano, all they play a role in this process. And then starts the function from the windpipe, and then it goes out of the mouth. Sometimes it goes out of the nose, then it becomes a nasal. Sometimes it goes simultaneously through the mouth and the nose, then it becomes anunasika. So all these nuances of speech, they were already captured by the earlier tradition. So Pāṇini got all these things handed down to him. They were ready-made there. Pāṇini made use of them. But the credit goes to the previous phoneticians. So they did it. And about other languages, you're talking about other languages. They say phonetics, the science of phonetics arose in the West only in the late 19th century.
I was more connecting the phonetic with the meaning of it.
Yeah.
That seems to be
No, actually, that is not the case in Sanskrit. You cannot connect every phoneme with every meaning. It was Pāṇini's endeavor, though, to connect each and every part of the speech unit with a certain meaning. I can go into all those details if you give me more lectures. This is very difficult too. But that is yet another very beautiful part of Pāṇini's grammar. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask a question about the phonetics and his phonemic analysis, which is so sophisticated. It hasn't really been better driven in the 20th century. And you've gone into that, and maybe there'll be more opportunity to hear about it tomorrow. But you've already addressed some of it. Grammars in general are a pedagogic tool. And most Indian languages, modern Indian languages, it was the missionaries, as you know, who came and wrote dictionaries and grammars because they wanted to learn it or teach it and so on. So was there a kind of foreign element to Panini? Was there some reason why you would have to write a grammar, maybe to teach these Chinese monks who were coming, or was there some element of foreignness? Because otherwise, as you said, speech is not really broken up. You just speak. You know, you don't have to analyze it and parse it the way the grammarians did.
First of all, I want to make sure I understood your question correctly. Now, do you mean to say that Pāṇini was influenced by foreigners?
No, was there something, was there a need for him to teach foreigners, or was he somehow himself outside the tradition that he had to learn it?
Okay. Perhaps I may clear this point tomorrow, but okay, I don't remember what I'm going to say tomorrow. But the fact is that, and we are always to understand this, remember it, Pāṇini never wanted to teach grammar of Sanskrit language. His intention was completely different. That first thing you have always to remember. His intention was, first of all, memorization. So he wanted to create a grammar which could be very easily memorized by all the students who were studying in the Pathashalas during those time. Because they wanted to lessen the burden on the memory. And this didn't happen only with grammar. It did happen with other scientific treatises also. They wrote very short and pithy treatises so that they could keep them in their memory because the whole knowledge was being orally transmitted. That was the purpose. Pāṇini did not write it for any other, you can say foreigner or anything. But his purpose was totally different. He wanted to prepare a very pithy, concise model of composing a grammar. So, what was Pāṇini's basic aim is a question which is addressed by many linguists of today. And one answer is, it must have been an intellectual exercise for Pāṇini. He just wanted to play with the science of grammar, and he said, okay, let me see how far I can go into this. And then he came, I have discovered something which you can call a computer today. Pāṇini was the first computer scientist, they say. So it was purely, basically memorization. That was the purpose. And therefore he made it very, very concise. It was not being taught as a basic textbook of grammar in Pathashalas. It was always accompanied by a commentary, by an interpretation, by his followers. And then only it became understood. And therefore I always make a very paradoxical statement when I teach Pāṇini, that Pāṇini's grammar is meant only for those who are thoroughly well versed with Sanskrit language and who are thoroughly well versed with Pāṇini's grammar. Because his rules are so intermingled and they are so interconnected with each other. You must have seen that. Even in order to understand the very first rule of Pāṇini's Ashtadhyayi, you need to understand the rest of the Ashtadhyayi. And how can you do that? You cannot just open the book of Ashtadhyayi and let me try to understand Vriddhi Radhesh. No, you can never understand a single word out of it. So, you need a guru. First of all, to help you decode the language, code language. So, with that decoding mechanism, you first decode it. And then once you get that decoding mechanism, everything is like a cow. But as you learn, just a minute. In schools, you learn by heart those tables. Multiplication table, 2, 2, 4, 2, 3, 6, 2, 4, 8, something like this. I think they do it even today, but we used to do it in our schools. Nowadays there are calculators, so these young children say, why do we need it? We look into the computer. So this is a kind of a table for language analysis. What Panini gave is a very handy table for language analysis. And that came very useful for other scientific treatises as well, later on. Did I make it clear? To some extent. Maybe tomorrow and day after tomorrow. Actually, Pāṇini is not a thing which can be talked about in 3 sessions. It's a great injustice to Pāṇini. Is Raviji there? Luckily, he's not there. Don't tell him my comments. Yeah, please.
I think one of the disadvantages of looking at Panini from the 20th or 21st century is we learn grammar as a prescriptive grammar, whereas Panini is essentially a generative grammar. And incidentally, the Chinese came 1,000 years after Panini, so it couldn't have been to teach them anything, people like there have been others. Yeah.
So this is your observation. I want... Is it your... Yeah. but I can comment on it. You are talking about today's scholars, and they have made it into a prescriptive grammar. That is not the case.
No, I'm talking about today's scholars teaching languages. The school teachers who teach languages by first coming up with the grammar and then making the children learn that.
Yeah, but they teach it as a prescriptive model. Yeah, but Pāṇini must have moved in his grave, I should say, when he came to know that his grammar is being used as prescriptive. It was indeed. It happened after Pāṇini's death. And the whole subsequent Sanskrit tradition, they adored Pāṇini, they respected Pāṇini's grammar to such an extent that they said, whatever word goes beyond Pāṇini, we are not going to accept it. Whatever Pāṇini said is always should be regarded as standard Sanskrit. So this is how Sanskrit was fitted into the framework of Pāṇini's grammar. And thus Pāṇini became prescriptive. The poor fellow never wanted to be prescriptive. He was so polite, so nice a person. He's my first love, I should say. I simply fell in love with his grammar. And always I can visualize Pāṇini's image. So very, very humble person. And he simply wanted to give you what he could learn from Sanskrit language. And he said, look, he uses the word drishyate in his Vyakarana. Drishyate means it is seen. What I see in the language is this. But he never say, you must use like this. There is no must tone anywhere in his Ashtadhyayi. No must. He simply says, is. That's what I'm going to explain tomorrow. Every rule is just is. This is this is this. Yeah.
I think we're out of time. Okay, well, last question.
Why last? Time is up.
Actually, I'm a student of history, so fortunately or unfortunately, I'll be seeing this from a historical perspective. So when we talk about Pāṇini, who comes to the 6th century BC, and again Patanjali, maybe we date him to the 3rd or 2nd century BC, we have proper Sanskrit grammatical works coming. But when we look at Indian history at 3rd century BC, Prakrit also becomes very important. It rises to the fore. So when we are talking about Prakrit, Ashoka is delivering inscriptions in Prakrit. So how much of Prakrit is actually, does Prakrit really borrow something from Pāṇini's grammar, or where can we see Prakrit, the rise of Prakrit amidst the grammatical works like Pāṇini and Patanjali coming out? That's my question.
Sanskrit and Prakrit were the languages which developed simultaneously, actually. Prakrit was a language of common people. Sanskrit was a language of particular masses. After Pāṇini, I'm talking you. At the time of Pāṇini, Sanskrit was a language being spoken at least in the place where Pāṇini lived. This much we can certainly say. It is very much a spoken language, and it was being used because when we study Pāṇini's grammar, we really feel like that it must have been spoken. There are abuses, for instance, which are explained by Pāṇini. And there are many other things. Appreciation, anger, and then there is contempt. All these tones, they are caught up by Pāṇini, which is a very unique thing. Again, in no other grammar you will see this. But Pāṇini says that when a person wants to express his anger, he should utter this. When he wants to express appreciation, he should say this. So this is about spoken language. Now when Prakrit was developing side by side with Sanskrit, a time came when Sanskrit went backstage because it became a language of classes and Prakrit was a language of masses. And then when there was a question of writing a grammar of Prakrit, actually I am going to talk about it tomorrow, but doesn't matter. You will be surprised to know that earlier Prakrit grammars, they were all modeled on Pāṇini's grammar. And we really don't know whether Prakrit language really followed the rules of grammar because earlier Prakrit literature is not available to us. Earlier Prakrit literature of that period. The Ashokan Prakrit you are talking about was a real vernacular, because it was Buddha's actually edict. Buddha really taught his disciples, wherever you go, you speak in the vernacular language. You teach them Buddha's Upadesha in vernacular. And therefore, even Ashoka followed this, and therefore you will find that. That is a different thing. So whether there was Pāṇini's grammar followed in Prakrit language, which we find on the Shilalekhas, is a different question, and studies have come up with that. But otherwise, you will find that languages of many ancient languages, grammars of many ancient languages, Prakrit and even Pali, the language of Buddhist canon, all those earlier grammars, they were composed in Pāṇinian model. And they gave even examples from Prakrit, which were very close to Sanskrit words. So we have a doubt whether they really existed in the language or they were just artificial words. They may not have existed in the language, but simply because they are following grammar, they thought that they must give examples also from the language which is similar to Sanskrit. You know, such kind of, they call it grammarian's language. That also existed in ancient times. Grammarian's language is a concept which came into existence later when Whitney, an English linguist, wrote a grammar following Pāṇini. And then he said whatever language was is reflected in Pāṇini's grammar is all artificial grammarian's language. Well, he was refuted later on. But this kind of grammarian's language did exist. And you will find it in the commentaries. That is yet another topic which needs so many lectures.
We'll come back for another masterclass.
No, masterclass with 3 lectures is never. That is an injustice to Panini. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.